You can choose how you have your version of the future. So the world has always been unpredictable. It's been unpredictable my entire career, which is 30 some years. And it always will be. So if you expect the world to be stable, then you will be surprised and a little bit confused. If you expect the world to do everything you want and be able to control it, you can. If you expect the world to care about everything you do, it won't. So what you have to do is think about the things you can control and how you carry yourself and your personal footprint creatively, and then navigate the world based on that.
Welcome to Object, Subject, Form, a series of conversations exploring the human side of creativity at the evolving intersection of art, technology, and finance. Season 2 looks towards the technologies and ideas that will shape the next 5 to 10 years of creative practice. In this episode, I'm joined by Simon Dixon, co-founder of international branding agency DixonBaxi. At DixonBaxi, Be Brave is their defining spirit, underpinning collaborations with some of the world's most iconic companies across sports, entertainment, media, the new economy, and technology. In our conversation, Simon explains the nuances of running a studio during rapid technological advancements in machine learning and AI, and the opportunities new tools offer to shape a more innovative future. He shares thoughtful perspectives on why adaptability is essential, not just for survival, but for thriving in a world that refuses to stand still. Simon, good morning. Well, actually, I suppose it's afternoon there now, yeah?
Yeah, it's just after lunch. Hey, Simon, how are you doing?
Yeah, it's a little earlier here, 6 a.m., but wanted to make sure we did this at a good time. So, Simon, I really appreciate the time. I know you're a really busy man. You've got a lot going on. So thank you for sitting down and having this conversation with me today.
You're welcome. Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's lovely to chat again.
Always. So I see on the DixonBaxi website, there's a big statement that says, brave brands will change the world. And I'm wondering, how does that statement apply to you now that you're navigating an industry that's undergoing so much change?
Yeah, it's a good first question. I suppose the bravery we're talking about is, in a sense, making enough change to remain relevant in the world. So there's a real risk of inaction. So if you just stay as you are, the world will start to change around you. It's inevitable. Technology, social, structural, cultural, behavioral changes happen all the time. And we're in one of those accelerated periods that we have where a nascent technology comes along and it starts to inform different ways of working. So an applied intelligent technology alongside the social media and technology and digital technologies we already have challenges all of us and brands to show up in the world in a different way. Yep. And our feeling is it's better to be part of the change in a positive, optimistic way than to resist the change and, in a sense, be overrun by it. You don't necessarily have to do everything that everybody does. You don't have to do everything with every technology, but you certainly have to be aware about the benefits and negatives to you as a company or individual creator. So I guess that's the rationale.
So how would you describe some of those benefits to you now? Obviously, when there's technology that's advancing this fast, there's a big divide. Some people or studios are not so fond of the idea, and others are embracing it. So do you see it in a positive or more of a negative light?
It's inherently both, but we don't know exactly what it's going to be until we get further into it. So I guess we're talking about two levels of technologies. There's a level of technology that you and I are using at the moment. So the way that we all communicate, see each other and connect with each other has rapidly changed. So we can all learn together at the same time, which, 10, 15 years ago, there was a bit of a lag. Whereas now, instantaneously, we all know everything about everything. So we're all agreeing or disagreeing at the same time about things, which is one level. But then what you're talking about is applied intelligent technologies like AI and things like that, which can affect our work streams. So, of course, on one side, there is a danger of replication of other people's work originality and source, manufacture of things that can change people's opinions negatively, can cover up for darker truths, can put people out of work, and also just put pressure on people to work a different way when they've worked in a traditional way. So all of those things can be quite scary. The flip side is, of course, it's inevitable these technologies are going to happen in the same way that the world has been digitized. We can't slow that engine down. But what we can do is turn up and use those things in ways that still deliver against the principles and ideals that we've had as creators before those technologies. So don't rip people off, don't cheat, don't share negative and unnecessary difficult ideas with people, be honourable. And then when it comes to invention, I think in a sense, it's like an accelerated version of what happened with social media, which is humans through social media saw all creativity relatively instantly. And that creates very quick trends where people see something and get to good really quickly because they're standing on other people's shoulders very rapidly. So it's not necessarily direct copying, but it's very heavily influenced instantly by other people's work. The thing with AI, that does it for you, but it's the same principle, which is I'd like a certain thing. And what it's doing is drawing on a universe of information that's been created by other people. The problem is it's always the same information. So if you don't put new input in, the intelligent model will start to make things that get a bit grey and similar. So we're already seeing that the style of it is getting similar wherever it shows up. So I think what you need to think about is what do you feed into that engine? And how do you use it as a tool or technology to accelerate your individual, original, idiosyncratic creativity rather than just cheating to get a good image? And I think when you look at a lot of the stuff, it's not really applied to the world. It's just lots of little campaigns and bits and bobs and things. And it's really making things that we've seen before to a higher level. So my interest is how it filters into the world and improves our working practice, but on the methodologies and ideas that we've had already.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I did recently do a talk about the importance of your ability to think and to think creatively and think critically and the value that does accompany that skill set. Mm-hmm. So do you think now that we have this monster of a tool, machine learning, AI, working alongside us, be it image making, text or video, do you think that humans' unique ability to think will become more valuable or become less valuable because it could be considered less efficient, and go as far as to say that we don't need to lean on a designer or a design team in the way that we used to?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think some of it comes down to learning, some of it comes down to making, and some of it comes down to the reasons that you're making things. So if you use these technologies to make something very rapidly, you are not necessarily learning the distinct skills or beats to how that was manufactured in the first place. And there's the same thing if you're learning. If you just systemize knowledge, remember that base knowledge, and you don't go through the process of how you onboard that information in your head, you're losing some of the skills of a sharp creator who processes information on their own terms versus letting somebody else process it.
Yeah.
So it's a bit like being in the room with someone who's hyper talented and saying, I'd like to make something, what would you make? There's less personal involvement in that because that person's incredibly talented and just spits something out. So it's about how you turn up and interact with it, I think, and how it fits into your working practice. It's interesting because on one level, it looks like mechanically it will replace a lot of the mechanical things that we'll do. But of course, it's also making things that are highly intelligent and inventive as well. And ultimately, it'll be between those two things. So I think it'll come down to how different people choose to use it. I think if you use it as one of your inputs and you have different types of inputs, other people, real world experiences, analog experiences, other digital experiences, and that technology, then you have a choice of ways of using that information and use that model in a sense to host and systemize everything for you. If you just use it, you're very reliant on who made the model in the first place and what they decided to do with it, because you haven't got all of the inputs and you don't know what it's searching. So if you look at ChatGPT, for example, you can see how it's searching the web now, but of course it's only searching a very narrow part of it. because of who owns it. So ultimately, you've got to be careful that you don't fall inside of somebody else's bubble, and you have your own bubble as well.
Yeah, and so not to get too esoteric here with this concept, but I do believe we have a special ability as humans to access infinite ideas through our consciousness. This like infinite plane of ideas, if we create the right environment in which to achieve creative flow and explore and receive them. And we also have the ability to create outside of the computer, take external inputs and references, and use that material as a starting point in order to develop our own identity and POV first. And even when clients approach design shops, most of the time they're coming for a studio style, or majority of the time wanting to work with a creative at that studio. And I think it works the same way with individuals. So I do think there's still a lot more room for people to buy into a person, buy into an artist and their associated style or vision.
I agree. I think there's a lot of really smart points in what you say. I think you can see what drives the creative entity in the way that their work shows up. So if we look at everyone's work, if you and I were just looking objectively at different types of agency, studios, individual creators, you'd be able to stack them very quickly into types of agencies based on your instinct with the work, because that's the truth of it is in the real world, people only see the work. They don't ever meet the creators. They don't understand how the work is made, but they understand the feeling of it. And you can tell the difference between highly crafted and excellent and something that's less well crafted. You can tell the difference between something original and distinct versus something that's fairly derivative. And of course, what you want to do is move to a space where you're creating something that is truthful to how you see the creative world, but using those technologies to help facilitate that in the way it has. When I started the agency, many things didn't exist. So smartphones, most of the technologies we use now, the softwares, self-driving cars, none of this existed. So we've had to figure out how we work with these extra things. And for me, it's a combination of imagination, creation, and curation. They're the states that you kind of move around, which is when I think about using any technology, I only think about that at the point once I've imagined what I'd like to do. So I don't like the technology to tell me what to do. I like to be in a state where I've thought of something, and then you are curating life experience and knowledge, and then you create something from that. If you sit down and you haven't imagined something new and you just say, I'll make something, you will still invent things, but you're also at the mercy of the experience and how the technology works with you. And you can see that in people's work with smarter softwares now and different kind of visual trends. They're letting the technology, the software and the trends create a large proportion of the work rather than deciding why to do that.
Yeah, I've never been a fan of chasing design trends, and I've always at least tried to make a conscious effort to try to avoid it in my own practice. And I always reference the example of when After Effects came out and you had the ability to use a camera in 3D space to animate typography. And you would see so much bad type and so much badly animated camera moves flying all over the place. And
yeah, exactly.
The point here I'm trying to make is just because the technology exists, it doesn't mean you should use it out of the box. And, design for me is all about practicing restraint and knowing why you are doing something. And I think you're right. We will see a lot of generated content that looks very similar and may even actually break foundational principles of the craft, be it filmmaking or design or photography, typography, whatever it might be. So I don't think it will completely collapse. I mean, the craft is the craft and there's a lot of talent driving it. And the foundational principles are the foundational principles. So I think perhaps the tech will enable us to explore more efficiently, but hopefully retain, or better still, expand that bar of quality.
Yeah, I mean, on lots of levels, if it starts to kind of become very systemized and kind of commoditized and very similar, somebody will punch through that. Someone will rage against the machine and break it to create something new. And that's what usually happens when a new technology or way of working happens. There's a settling, and then people punch through that and use it really well. The other thing it does as well is democratize access to creating for people who come from backgrounds that maybe couldn't do that before. So traditionally, a lot of the world's creation was in the hands of a certain type of person, a certain type of agency in several specific locations around the world. Whereas now, anybody anywhere with a camera, video, some software, some AI, without even a university degree or anything, can instantly create and share it with the world and learn very rapidly through that interaction with their communities and become a creator. And there's something really powerful about that because, again, that will level it out. It'll level the playing field for people. And I like that part of it. There's bad that comes with that. You'll get derivative work and you'll get some work you don't like. You'll get some people fall in love with things that feel like they're finished. So if you're on Instagram and Behance, there's lots of images that look hyper finished. And people really love them and like the hell out of them because they're highly finished. But eventually that will settle and people will realize that you need more than that ultimately.
Yeah, it was kind of like when digital cameras first came out. You'd see everyone was a director.
Yeah.
Right? And a creative director. And then the cream always does kind of rise to the top out of the sea of everything. But I do love that it gives people more access, like you're saying, in places where you may not have had access to certain technology or equipment, and it is democratizing that. And I think that's part of the evolution. I mean, we went from, letterpress and movable type to computers and Adobe Illustrator and Quark Express and
exactly.
and InDesign, and the quality still retains. And I think people who are used to using certain technology might resist it at first.
Yeah, and that's fine. I think, it's okay to resist it if you don't want to do it, because that might challenge you to do something else. There's also a thing that some people burn instantly and very brightly, and other people burn in a sustained way. There's different ways of turning up in as a creator in the world. So you might have somebody who makes music or makes something visually or does a style of design that's very successful for a short period, but then they kind of fade back as the trend disappears. But then there's other creators who have something underneath their work that has a relevance that maintains its integrity long term and shows up in the world in other ways. So it kind of depends how you want to create ultimately. And I think there's space for everybody to do it the way they want to. And I see it as a great opportunity to engage the world. Because if you think about it, there's never been a better time to create and share with people. And, there's billions of photographers now that there weren't 20 years ago. Everybody takes photographs. Everyone's a photographer. Everyone's recording everything. So people, on TikTok, there's billions of people using it and creating content all the time. So content creators, of course, some of them are going to be really high-end creators and super original and imaginative. Many of them will just be fun to watch for a while, and lots will be not so good and derivative, which is how creativity works. But there's now vehicles to do things that you couldn't do before and have direct relationships with people in the world, as well as working for brands or, communicating for other companies. So in a sense, it gives a wider choice in terms of how you want to create as a creator.
And it also starts to provide different ways in which we communicate. And some of that is forced through algorithm. So the way that people will present themselves or present their ideas or edit the content, I think there's kind of like this master hand sometimes where the algorithm is dictating that. And so everybody sort of figures out, oh, okay, this is successful and this is grabbing attention. So let me create my work like that. And you said something about consistency and creators or companies that kind of shoot up like a rocket and get all of this fame at certain moments of, their existence. And I feel like DixonBaxi has been very consistent. I mean, from 2001, you've clearly I think, spent a lot of time thinking about how you and your team approach creative problem solving and approach the work. And your philosophies appear very strong, at least from the outside, as though it runs through the veins of your company and through your collaborators and employees. So with that said, how do you think DixonBaxi has been able to adapt to so much change and at the same time being able to maintain your core values? And do you think they've shifted from the outset or actually remained pretty consistent? Because from what I've seen and following your work over the years, there's this pretty consistent thread.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I mean, obviously we have changed. You mature, you add people, you grow when you add new team members because they bring different ideas. But I think I've always thought if there's a kind of a more universal truth to how you see your work, and you want to make work that makes you happy, makes you proud, you enjoy doing, and you think makes a difference, and you do that for the right reasons that serve you and the people you're working with, and then ultimately the people you're designing for, then you can be comfortable to a degree in your own skin, where you don't need any specific plaudits like fame or likes or awards or anything to be the metric that defines whether or not you're successful. And it depends who you are. Some people like having a mass kind of digital audience. Some people like being very private with their practice and, keeping it kind of hidden. We're kind of somewhere in the middle that we like to be open source and share our ideas as much as anything to kind of stop the industry being so opaque. We like the idea of just showing people that there's lots of ways of working. But we've always had a number of things, which is we like the idea of embracing change. We like the idea of being up for that challenge of changing. So we're kind of curious and hardwired to take calculated risks in our creative process. We also think it's really important to grow and change incrementally. So it's thousands of small decisions, I think, that make you excellent rather than one big one. Because it's what you do when no one's looking is actually what defines whether or not you're excellent. And I'm not saying we're excellent. I'm just saying ascribing for a type of excellence. I think it's also being truthful to the type of work that you suit. Not every agency or creative suits every piece of work. So if you kind of curate your relationships with people and figure out how you best serve them and do that work, you'll be able to do better work. So having a relationship with people that has a shared ambition, I think, makes the work better. And then, in a sense, going after that flame of something that is really beautiful and wonderful and idiosyncratic and makes your heart race more. I think that's what it's about. Like, I work because there's a feeling I get in my stomach when I'm excited about the work that I can't cheat.
Yes.
And that flow state is a real thing. Like, if you get in that flow state, you make shit that you believe in. And I can see that on the screens and on the walls of the studio. So obviously I don't make day to day in the same way I did when I was earlier in my career. But I can see the energy in the studio when things are on. There's a feeling, and that's what we want to capture. So that is self-determined by the work and what we do and a tolerance for change. But it's not determined by what somebody else tells us or the industry or trends or a particular technology tells us. It's what we believe is right for the particular thing we're doing in that moment. And I think if you can stay in the moment and look upwards, it's a really wonderful thing to be in the moment and not look too far or not look too far backwards and just make the most of what you have now, I think is a really important part of it.
Yeah, agreed. And I love that you mentioned flow state because I think that's something that is not discussed enough. And there's this great book, Stealing Fire. I have to read it again, but read it quite a few years ago. But I'd love to know how you achieve flow state and what flow means to you.
There's a number of things, I suppose. Being in a deadline-driven, chaotic environment, which is what design is, it's kind of it's a messy subject. It's not perfect because you're pulling ideas out of yourself, which in some level is subjective, and then you're applying it to a task or a problem, so that it's never perfect. So you have to get used to making work that isn't very good before you make great work. You've got to be able to make work where you feel you're making a difference and you can see yourself in the work, but also you're collaborating with others. So you need to make space for them to see themselves and how you work together. And then I think there's just a truth that I was chatting to one of our team just before I came in here, and he was saying, he was a bit tired. He wasn't quite finding it on the project. And sometimes you just get a little bit lost. So you have to understand that you need to disconnect sometimes, or look at it from a different perspective, or talk to somebody. But basically, it's about focus. It's allowing yourself to be intuitively in the moment with the work, because once you've got the brief, so you have a brief, you have a task, you've got lots of inputs, you've heard lots of things, you need to almost take them off and put them down, and then let the work tell you what it's going to be, because you will still remember that stuff. If you go through a tick box exercise of is it delivering against all these things initially, it becomes very mechanical. But if you just let the work out and trust that your creative engine will deliver something interesting, once you start to fall in love with it, and rather than like it, love it, then you're in a flow state. And then once you've done that long enough and that energy stops, you then decide what you've won. And then you see if it works for the brief. But if you stop that, it doesn't work as well. So that's a bit long-winded, but that's how I see it.
Yeah, and I think ideas are extremely fragile, especially when you're trying to push beyond mediocrity and going beyond just answering the brief in an average way. And something I have to do on a daily basis is help navigate ideas through the machine. And so how do you approach this? How have you been able to cradle, for lack of a better term, like so many great ideas through the many obstacles that you face with your clients?
So there's a number of things that work into that. One is you have to create a safe space for everyone to create in, that everyone's voice is equal in the moment of creation, rather than it being a hierarchy. So everybody has a share of voice. You've got to look at the work, not the person. You've got to realize that you're creating something collectively. So you bring everything together and, in a sense, figure what you've won. But it's important that when you look at the brief, you look what's driving the brief rather than just the surface. Most briefs are relatively mechanical, but there's a bigger thing underneath, and in a sense of an emotional experience and connection that you're going to have with the people you're designing for. And what you want to do is show that to the client, show why you're solving what's underneath the brief and how it works for the people that you're designing for, ultimately the end audience. But also you want that to be highly collaborative with the client, because they have a lot of inbuilt knowledge. They're experts in their brand, in their company. So instead of projecting, the answer, it's basically a dialogue, which is, we believe this objectively, but as an expert, this. And how do we bring those two things together to create power and, in a sense, share that journey together? Because if you share it, the buy-in's a lot easier. So it's about building consensus around what wins for everybody and what wins for the end audience, and making sure it tracks back to the problem solving and strategies. And then often it's creating an executive summary of that, which is shareable without you being there, so that it's easy for other people to see the idea very quickly and understand it as an idea and be able to tell other people about it. Because if you have an idea that other people can't share, it's not clear enough. And I think a lot of it is about that. So there's a number of things. And then within that, there's lots of techniques to be very careful that when you're looking at work, there's often like a tiny little thing in a corner that is a brilliant idea, but it's not as well manufactured as this thing over here. So you need to be able to water those ideas and give them space to grow, because this thing we were talking about with AI, someone will do an AI image and they'll go, that's awesome, it's fully finished, blah, 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 buy it. But it's empty and whatever. Over here is a little sketch of an idea that could actually extrapolate out to be something that's really beautiful as a system. So, those types of things have been really sensitive. And then I often look at the work through the eyes of different people. So I look at the work as me. So I'm like completely subjective at that point. Do I like the shit or not? What do I love? Mm-hmm. And I always look at optimistically. What do I love? And then I look at it through the eyes of the audience. What will they feel? And what do I want them to do with this work? I think a little bit about the client, but mainly the audience. And then I'll just think about someone like a regular person, my mum or somebody like that. What would they think if they looked at it? So I put it through different stress tests, all instantaneously. It's not like a long, convoluted thing. But I think that's very important, is to view it through other people's eyes as much as you can, as well as yourself. And that just helps stress test it a little bit.
Yeah, and it takes the creative bias out of it, doesn't it?
A little bit. You do need creative bias, though. You do need to believe in your work, though. I think it's really important. It's a really symbiotic thing of like believing in the work, but also being sensitive that you're serving somebody else.
Right. It's not just about you.
No, it's about you and others, but it's about what you can do for other people. Because otherwise it'd be pure art, and then, we could do what the hell we wanted.
Yeah. So what do you care about? I mean, what keeps you up at night? Has there been, since you've had the company and gone through all of these changes, are there consistent things that keep you up at night, or is that a constantly changing nightmare?
It's an interesting question. It's one actually I don't get asked very often. So the honest answer, it's a reoccurring cycle of things. So if I was thinking about this, are you asking me as someone who runs the company rather than me as a designer?
Both. Take it which direction you want to take.
Well, if it's me as a designer, is the work something I love and I'm proud of, and am I growing? That's the thing I care about the most. Am I learning and changing and developing? That's the thing that I care about the most. So in any given moment, I have all the experience, everything that I've ever gained, and then I put into that moment and make something new, or help people make something new. And it's, do I believe in it, and do I love it, and is it something important to me? And do I get a buzz from it? So that makes me happy. When I think about like running an agency, of course, what happens is you're thinking about, where does the work come from? How does the engine of the business work? What's the team dynamics? How do the team internally grow and develop in their careers? And how do you create the space for them to create the work they want to create? What is your reputation, the quality of what you do? And are you making the thing that will stand you up against the world in a positive way? Do you carry yourself in a really good way? What do you do when the world outside is chaotic? How do you protect yourself from the chaos of things that you can't control? What technologies do you use? How do you change your working practice to account for the fact that the world has changed and behaviors and technologies changed? There's an endless loop of things that go round and round, but it's usually people is the biggest thing that you worry about when you're thinking about an agency, because you have a duty of care to them. And if you get that right, they have a successful career both with you and when they move on. And the work is better if they're in the right frame of mind. And it's actually the job is to allow them to make work that is meaningful to them, but meaningful to the whole team.
Yeah. I felt like as you graduate through the various stages of your design career, from like designer, you go to art director, you go to creative director, then you're managing people's career in a sense. And then you start a company, and then you're really responsible for people's careers as well as executing beautiful creative. So I think that's something that I've learned along this journey, that it becomes less about you as an individual and your sort of creative desires. I mean, that will always be there.
Yeah.
But the net is kind of cast a lot wider now, and you've got to think about so much more, because it isn't just about you, it's about everyone that's around you.
Yeah, it's about everybody else. I mean, there's different ways of running a company. So the thing is, I only know my way of doing it because I started my first company when I was very young, and I've only ever really opened studios and worked with other people who've opened studios and DixonBaxi, where they're very self-determined. I've never really been taught how to do this properly by working at another big networked agency or working client side.
Which could be a blessing. You're running off instinct.
Yes, something like that. I mean, I've always learned by doing, so I've always found it very valuable, and I enjoy that feeling of not knowing what's next. I get a real buzz from that. But I always think it's about creating the space for other people to get better. So, like when I was very young, I was trying to be a brilliant designer. Like I was trying to master how to be like a brilliant designer. And I think I got to a pretty good level, to be fair. It took me a while, but I definitely got to a fairly elite level in terms of being a designer. But now my job is to create space for other people to go on that journey. I don't lose that kind of knowledge of what it's like to be a designer that works at a very high level and has a lot of kind of personal experience of making very tangible and visible projects and things that you're proud of. But you kind of almost have to recess and let them do it. So you kind of instead of leading from the top, you have to kind of lead from underneath and create the space, I think, and make yourself a little bit smaller and just trust other people to go do it, really.
Yeah. Was that hard for you to
it was initially
learn that as the studio started to get bigger?
Yeah, of course. There's a massive thing, which is all creative directors get to a point where, not all, but you get to a point where you're so highly tuned, so fast, so definitive, so confident in your creative skills, that it's often easier for you to make something than somebody else is.
Yeah.
But the skill is understanding you've got to teach the other person to do it, and you've got to teach many people to do it, and they're never going to have the same level of experience you have in that moment, nor are they going to create the same way you would. They're going to create the way they do. So you have to connect yourself. So when you see the work, you've got to go back in time to how you learn, because if you don't let people go through the process of making mistakes, self-determining how they do things, and you always give them the answer or stop them doing things. So in a sense, directing them. That's why I don't like creative director, really. You shouldn't be direction. It should be a support and communication and mentorship as opposed to direction. And it allows them to make the decisions, or at least be a large part of the decision-making tree creatively. So I think that's a big part of it.
How do you guide creative? I mean, because you said that nobody's going to create the way that you create, and probably everything that leaves the company, I'm sure you see it.
Yeah.
With that vision you may have in your mind, how do you manage your own creative desires in that process and enable people to add and to potentially change or sway what the final outcome is of that brief or project?
Yeah, in that, for all me being a good designer or great designer when I was younger, more hands-on, like, when I was writing, there's a kind of phase where you really accelerate as a designer. We've got loads of people who are better than I am. So and it's not just designers, it's producers, writers, strategists, operational teams, film people, motion people. So there's a lot of people who create in ways I personally couldn't create in. But for me, it's about standards. So my job, I think, is to help give shape to the direction of the company, the creative standards, and protect that, but also strive to be an ever-learning organization. So we're always at the edge of where our work, technology, and what we do meets the world. And that's what I look for. So as long as we hit the standards we believe in, and we won't do that in every single moment. So you have to realize that it's about a body of work and a way of working as opposed to any individual component, because you can't put pressure on any one thing. Because it's easy for it to break if you look at a single thing. And then when I look at the work, I have a feeling I basically look at it in a few ways. Does that look like us? Does that look like something we've done really well before? So maybe we should do something different. Is this work distinct and useful and specific to this particular application rather than just good design? Does it excite us? Does my heart rate increase? Do I feel good about it? And on a craft level, is it achieving a level of craft and build and integrity in the actual quality of the design that I can say it's well crafted and of high level? So you move around those matrix, and then you say, well, that's not a style I personally would do, but it was really good and it's really successful, and I get great joy from seeing other people do that.
How many people do you have on your team now?
There's 50 in the company.
50 so far.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one question that sort of comes to my mind with a company, I'd say, would you say it's about a mid-sized company, 50 people classified? Yeah. When you're going through growth, and also tech is evolving as well, how are agencies such as yourself constantly staying up to date with this evolution? Because you have a team of people and you're sort of overseeing the creative work, but also is there this sort of tension with how things are evolving and this pressure to stay up to date with current technology at the same time? And then how do you sort of get your employees to stay up to date as well? Or do you think they're very self-motivated?
I think it's just part of the engine. It's part of this tolerance for change. So if you're inquisitive and curious, you'll bring new things in and you'll try new things. And I think the best way of doing it is just test things. So we have on a kind of day-to-day basis, it's, I was saying earlier about it's thousands of small decisions. So it's not in any given moment, you're not changing everything. You're just trying lots of things. So you're kind of creeping up on the change instead of it feeling like a heavy thing. Because if you said you've got to be AI centric now and you've got to use all the technology instantly, you'd be like, well, why? It's like only certain bits are useful to us. And it's very much like COVID. When we shut down for COVID, we went from a physical studio to remote in a week and nobody saw anybody for months. So there are certain periods where you are forced to make a change. But things like that show you very quickly that we're very adaptive as people. You're not just us, I mean, generally creatives and people at large, to make change if you have to. So sometimes it's a little bit forced on you and sometimes it's just part of the engine of change. And you just have to have a tolerance to make the most of it. And then alongside that, we have a project called Super Futures where at the beginning of the year and last year, we gave everybody time, like 2 or 3 weeks, to make a project based on an idea from a previous project, just using a new technology, a new tool, a new thing. Some are sound-based, some are AR, VR, AI, some are physical, some are painted, whatever. Just different ways of expressing themselves. And we've collated all of them. There's like 50 odd now. And we're going to release them as a digital project next year. But it's just put a little another invention engine in what we do. So we've just started to kind of call it out more explicitly that we're going to be in the business of engineering futures and inventing futures more in our creative process. Though we have done that for 2 decades, we're just making it a tiny bit more explicit just because we feel we're in a moment that's just a tiny bit more accelerated at the moment.
It's funny because I was thinking about designing a better future.
Yeah.
Right? Is something that is also a philosophy of yours. And so how do you see yourself contributing to designing a better future when the future could be so unpredictable?
Well, you can choose how you have your version of the future. So the world has always been unpredictable. It's been unpredictable my entire career, which is 30 some years. And it always will be. So if you expect the world to be stable, then you will be surprised and a little bit confused. If you expect the world to do everything you want and be able to control it, you can't. If you expect the world to care about everything you do, it won't. So what you have to do is think about the things you can control and how you carry yourself and your personal footprint creatively, and then navigate the world based on that, which is why we navigate what we do on principles rather than money, style, or awards or a particular metric. We just base it on what we think, and that allows us to get better at our job. I'm a lot better at my job than I was 10 years ago. I'm much, much better, and I'm profoundly better at my job than I was 20 years ago. So it's about self-improvement, I think, is in becoming a better person, becoming a better, studio owner, a better creator. And then it's about doing work that really works. It's not just style-based. It's not just stuff we want to do. It's when it shows up in the world and when it's used by people, any given day, 1 billion people might be using something we've made. So it's got to work, and they've got to benefit from that. They don't know we did it, but it's got to work. So that's the types of things we focus on, are the things we can control and the differences we can make based on the types of work that we make. And we want to be as optimistic and enjoy that as much as possible, because it's quite hard to do what we do. And it's very personal. So why not make the most of that?
The culture seems from the outside to be extremely top of mind for you and the leadership team. How was that process through COVID? And how have you been able to maintain such, again, from the outside, this is my perception, such a strong culture at the company?
Yeah, I mean, it's always hard to know what the perception is versus reality. So I think one of them is meeting whoever wants to work in the company equally, because I think if someone comes into the company and they have a perception of what it is and the reality doesn't match that, there's a disconnect and they feel unsettled. So a lot of it's about when we're hiring, and that's a reason that we share a lot of what we do, because we think it makes it explicit for people what they're getting into, because every studio has its own identity and culture, and of course you want to be a good culture, looks after people, protects them, pays them well, make sure that you don't hire and fire people rapidly, and be a concertina where you add people and get rid of them because you have money reasons. You want to be a good solid company. And then you want to inspire them to do the type of work they want. So that's about their career growth and how they develop their careers. So culturally, it's the lived reality of the individual is what they see, regardless of what you say the culture is. And some people have that differently. So it's constant checks and balances through performance reviews or Q&As or talking to people about what their lived reality is. And then if we hopefully train them well enough, when we hand them on to the next people, they've learned a lot, so their careers will continue to develop and blossom. But I think it's also just being explicit and saying out loud what you care about, trying to be as transparent as you can, and talking about what you care about. And also, to a certain extent, just realizing that people who run companies are just humans. So they make just as many mistakes as everybody else. There isn't a book about running agencies and a hustle book and a kind of leadership book and all this stuff, rock star leader stuff that people read on this stuff. It's like you have to learn it as you go, and it's hard. Yeah. Most people who run agencies in one form or another started as creators and ended up being somebody who runs a company. So you have to take a lot of knocks to get good at that and be self-aware enough to know what your weaknesses are and try and downplay them and play up your strengths, and then hire people that are better than you in areas that you're weak. And, all of us, I certainly have lots of weaknesses and I'm very aware of them. So I try to work with people that challenge me and protect me from my own weaknesses to a certain extent. So there's a bunch of things at play, but culture is a very, very fragile thing. And people often talk about agencies being like a family. I don't think it's like that. People have families and lives, but when we're working together, it's like being an elite sports team or a collective or an art collective. We have a shared ambition, and for whatever time we're together, we all share that ambition. And that's what we go after, and we all buy into that at the beginning, and we continue to believe in that until there's a change. And then, people come and go from companies for lots of different reasons. Sometimes it's a life choice. Sometimes it's they want to try something else. Sometimes other reasons. And what you want to do is have a culture that allows them to be the best that they can be in that moment. And even if they don't know it's happening, you're training them to be something that they don't realize they are. And often when people leave us, they don't necessarily know all the skills they've got on how things work. But when they go somewhere else, they suddenly realize that they've got this catalogue of things they've learned that they can suddenly apply to a new world. And that's a good indicator if I think the culture of learning and creativity is a useful one in some levels.
Culture and communication shifted pretty dramatically since 2020, over the last few years. And doing this, we're on a video call right now, having a conversation in 2 different time zones. And of course that was possible before that time, but it's become obviously more prevalent, especially within businesses and in our case, design companies. And so thinking about culture, has it been harder or, more challenging to retain the culture of the company when I'm assuming you have people that are working remote, or are you in 5 days a week, or are you still, what's the setup now?
We're hybrid. So studios in London. So we're in 3 days a week with the middle of the week. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We're doing a 4.5 day week at the moment, trialing that. And so that means there's not really any point in coming on Friday. A few people come in Monday because they like to work in the studio, and then, for most people, it makes sense to be at home. We do, of course, have flexibility where, half our team come from another country, so often they'll go home and spend an extended period of time working there or things like that. So we do have great flexibility, but we have a lot of in-studio time to help build the culture. And we just collectively decided that would be the thing that we do. Of course, we work with remote experts all the time, all over the world, on a semi-permanent basis or, a short-term basis. But yeah, we just use being together as a kind of good metric for helping with the culture. And I'm a great believer in showing up as well. So one of the great things about this, you and I can talk and learn from each other. I really like that. And I can speak to somebody in Nigeria this morning and someone tonight in France, or somebody in India or wherever, or Los Angeles. And it gives an immediacy to sharing ideas, which I love. But I also do like being in the real world. I think life is to be experienced, good and bad. And a lot of the connective tissue of how we move around and do things, I think, is part of life's experience. So I like that part of it as well. I like both things.
Yeah. On the theme of technology, if there was one wish that you had for future tech as we're evolving with it to help you with your creative process, what would that be?
That's a really good question. I don't actually know. What would it be? I think the only thing that you're never entirely certain of is the work you're going to do, but you have to trust that's going to happen. But on a creative level, I think being allowed to be inventive and having a seat at the table and knowing that we can create the way we want to create, to me, is more important than anything else. So any technology that facilitates our ability to remain relevant in the world and feel good about that and do it, in a sense, in a way that we can control, that's the thing I think about more than anything else, because I don't think about technology in the other way, because technology serves what we want to do rather than the other way around.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm really interested to understand about your conversations with clients. I think everyone's aware that efficiency is a big thing.
Yeah.
With the way that things are going. Maybe you're not feeling it yet, but I'm wondering if you're sort of thinking about this, where clients that you're collaborating with will eventually start to expect things to happen quicker, knowing that there's an ability with the way technology is evolving.
Yeah, it depends what part of the work.
Yeah.
So if you think about, let's say we're doing a globalized brand, they might have versioning. Let's say it's an entertainment brand. So they have versioning for all their shows, their content around the world. Thousands upon thousands of assets, versioned into different formats, languages, locations, uses, platforms. You can speed that process up, or we will be able to in the future speed that process up with kind of intelligent models that will be built for those businesses to do that. And there'll be a sacrifice of manufacturing commoditized work to that. But we're more in the kind of strategic invention, creation, and implementation as experiences end of things, because we're building design systems against strategies that we create for businesses. Yeah. So I think that part of it takes time, because you can have an idea very quickly, but you still need to process the value of that idea, why it exists, what other people's belief in it is, how useful it is to them, get them to believe in it, and then get that integrated into the organization. And humans take time. So even if I said to you, I've been in a meeting before where we're in the first meeting and I have an idea which I think that nails it, because sometimes you just get hit by an idea, but you still spend 6 months kind of, flushing that idea out. So I think it'll there would be pressure on efficiencies, and there always is. There's always economic and practical and pragmatic drivers to how you work with people. And I think, for us, it's about the value we bring. We're not a commoditized kind of widget-based agency. We're a kind of high change, futuring, high impact model. And that has a different value to maybe other ways of working. So we're only as successful as how well our work works and its effect for people. And if it keeps making a difference to companies and, increasing the way they connect to their audiences, increasing subscriptions, increasing growth of their business, increasing growth of their audience and emotional connections, and, simplifying their businesses, organizing their structures, all the things that you need to do on a big level for these types of projects, then we'll be allowed to continue to work. So that's what I focus on.
What's your prediction? Do you think there'll be more of an abundance of high impact, highly conceptualized work, mediocre work, or more of an abundance of just crappy work with no solid ideas?
I think there'll be the same. There'll be the same amount proportionally, but there'll be more creative work. So if you think about it, every 5 years that's gone on over the last 25, 30 years, there is more creative work in the world. So there's more brands, there's more communications platforms, there's more platforming for individual people. In fact, there's profound platforming for individual people. There's more agencies, there's more creators, there's more outputs. So it's expanding. 15, 20 years ago, there was no product designers.
Yeah.
Where there's millions of them now. So I think there will be room for millions upon millions of people to create. And if you think about it, creativity is the engine of change for humanity. It's always made the world a better place. So I think there's always going to be value in that. But what will happen, like any transition period where you move from one technology to another, some people will suffer from that and some people will benefit. But I think proportionally, despite more people creating, there'll be the same number of excellent people, the same number of mediocre, and the same number of crap. It's just how the human condition works. And you apply that to music, art, football, whatever you want.
Yeah, it just exponentially grows in.
Yeah, but there's just profoundly more creators. There's just more people making things. And it goes back to what I was saying before, because it's more democratized, people who wouldn't have got access to being a creator can now. And I really love that idea. So it's not all running through the same 6 countries and 4 types of people in the same 1,000 agencies. It's much more open than it was, which is a healthy thing.
And I saw that, I'm sure you did, to start in your career. There was like the sort of in motion design, at least over here, there was like the sort of big 5 or 6 companies. And,
exactly.
It was such a mystery around it, even in early college days. It's like you're starting your career. It's like, this magic around how do they do that? And then you go in and you do see like the systems were quite clunky, and no, you're not going to be able to afford one of those, like a telecine in your house, or be able to do color grading. It's like £1 million machine or something. And then things get easier and new products come out. And I remember even when DaVinci Resolve came out, because I used to love color grading, and I still do. And I was so interested in color correction. I was like, oh my God, like I don't want to switch jobs to go and learn this, but I do want to learn this. Yeah. And so then DaVinci came out, and it's like, wow. And I had a conversation with a colorist at the time. He was at Company 3, and I was sort of asking if I could come over and sit in some sessions just to understand those techniques, because I believe that color really can sort of change the feeling and the mood, obviously, of the final piece. And it's just that like cherry on top. And he said, you don't need to do that. He said, of course you're welcome to, but I suggest just getting a copy of DaVinci Resolve and start learning that yourself and playing around with the tools. And he said, what I'm actually telling you could be my demise, because there's going to be so many more people being able to do this.
Yeah. I mean, you think about it though, if you colored something, so you were thinking about color on art direction.
Yeah.
Part of it is down to the fact that you have a good eye. So inherently, if you were rearranging furniture in a room, or you were listening to music, or you were thinking about art direction or color, you have a sensibility that has a high tolerance. So you would naturally hone in on something that's interesting, where other people might not have that talent or expertise. The other thing that's in parallel with that, the person at Company 3 became an expert from doing it over a sustained period. So talent plus sustained time makes truly excellent work. So if you take control and you say, right, I'm going to really get on top of this, you can go from being a novice to someone who's exceptional. And then there's that magic of the fact that you've got an eye or you've got talent. And the combination of two is what makes the really exceptional people, whether that's playing piano or colouring art direction. So I think that's what's going to happen. So whatever tool you're using, I would expect you to have a very high tolerance for that and do something that when I look at it, I go, oh, fuck, that's cool. I swore then. Yeah. See, I did. Sorry.
It's all good.
But you can see what I mean.
I'm going to have to add that E on the rating now.
Yeah, sorry, dude. But you know, what I'm thinking about is it's in your hands then, isn't it? Because you as a colorist, it's what you care about. And the person who's talking to you is talking about the fact that coloring is subjective. So if you make something, you can now do it yourself rather than sitting with somebody to do it. And that's one of the things I like, is the direct nature of how you can make things faster personally than you could do previously. So you have a broader palette to work with, I think, which is really cool.
Yeah, and the ability to self-teach, right? I think there's beauty in the apprenticeship, and I feel like I did one with Kyle during my time at Prologue. It definitely felt like an apprenticeship where you're serving, right? And you're adding and bringing your ideas to the table, but there's something very practical about it. And there's beauty in that. But now we have a lot more access to content and creators sharing their ideas, and you can just, you just really need the internet connection to be able to access all of this information. And back to my point, because I kind of swerved away from it a little bit, was the fact that, there's like 5 or 6 big companies, and then people graduate from those companies and start up other companies. And then there's like a sort of tier 2, and some of those companies may overtake the larger companies that originally started up that you may have been working at. And then over time, another 5, 6, 7 years goes by, and then people graduate from those companies, and it starts to go down the sort of quote unquote pyramid scheme, right? Yeah. And it creates a lot of competition, but I think it sharpens things as well. And the ownership isn't just concentrated in one area, like you were saying, with just a few premium companies that could afford that kind of...
That's the thing. That's financial access. Don't forget, of course, they took the risk to do that when others didn't, and they developed something when other people didn't. But what's happening now is the competition levels out, in a sense, which is, agencies and careers and trends and various things come and go. And the question is, like, how do you stay in the game? What allows you to be in the game at the level you want to be at? And there's room enough for everyone, I think. There's room for more people. There's room for difference. There's room for a fresh take on things, which does make it, of course, competitive. But then if you're making work that is very personal, something that you love, something that you think is useful to people, and you can keep doing that to a level, you'll be able to sustain a really powerful career wherever you decide to work, whether it's agency, client side, individually as part of a big group. There's lots of choices about how you make things now. So I think that's really nice. It's not just one way of doing it.
That's right.
But you still got to want to do the work, and, to stay in the game and relevant at a high level for a long time does get progressively harder, but it's a fun challenge, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely sticking with it. And, as we were saying at the beginning, things evolve so much. And
you can be part of the change. Power. If you're, it's like riding the crest of a wave. You don't want to be in front of the wave, and you don't want to be behind the wave. You want to be on the wave. So if you can get there, you'll be okay. Yeah,
definitely. And talking about waves, what's next for DixonBaxi and yourself personally?
Well, it's a funny thing. When I walk out of the room, it'll be... is the work great? Are the people okay? Are we doing what we want to do? So I see it as a kind of like continuous thread. We've done a bunch of work this year that no one's seen. So we're working in a lot of with some very large, iconic companies. So from late January, we'll start to release those projects over a 6 to 9 month period. And what happens is the version of who you are as an agency is different to people's external perception because you've done the work. The Super Futures project, I said, is going to launch next year, which will be a digital version of it, then ultimately books. We're releasing the 3rd season of the DixonBaxi Way, which is like...
I love that, by the way. Thanks for putting those out.
Yeah, so we shot it. We're editing at the moment, the 3rd season. It's all the team again. And Apova and I have done one section on running an agency, so it's specific to that. And then the team are talking about collaboration, creativity and things. So all of those things will kind of come out. And then the new work will help determine the next work we do, which is always the fun thing, because when a project comes out, you would naturally get work off the back of that. So I'd be interested in chat to you in like 6 to 9 months to see what you think of the work, because there's some quite different industries, different types of work that you might not have seen from us before. So I'd be really interested to see what you think. But I think it's definitely some of the best work we've ever done, if not the best work. So, and it's by far our best team ever. So I'm excited about next year. The industry's been through quite a tricky time the last couple of years for lots of people. And, I'm conscious of that. So I want to start next year feeling really positive and optimistic and excited about what's next for us and the industry. And I think if we all get together and get up and get off the mat and go after what we all do really well, the industry will be healthier.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what you've done, especially if you're feeling like it's sort of challenging what people's perceptions are as well. I think that's a good thing, because when you put that work out, it could change the trajectory of the kind of work that you do.
That's what I'm hoping.
Right? Yeah. I
mean, that's always been the case. We've, certain types of our work is highly visible and people recognize that more than other pieces of work. But you are literally only as good as your last job, really. After you get to a certain level and you've got a decent back catalogue, you can always go through your back catalogue and say, we've done this, done that, done this, so people kind of see you for that. But it's the fresh work. It's like, where are you today versus where were you 5 years ago is, I think, the interesting debate. And I think our industry settled a little bit. There's a lot of work that is pretty good, but I don't think there's a lot of stuff I'm seeing at the moment that is really setting the world on fire. So I think that's going to come out. I think there's a bunch of agencies that have been working over the last year or so that their projects will come out, and I'll be interested to see what they're like, because I'm excited somebody will be making some cool shit that we haven't seen yet. And hopefully, hopefully we're one of those people, but I'm also really excited to see what other people are doing as well.
Yeah, keeps it fresh. And I think attention spans now, right, it's a little shorter. So like you said, it's primarily like the last few jobs you've done and what people remember. And
very much so.
It's saturated a bit more now, right? So,
it's much more immediate than it used to be. And also it's generational. For us, obviously, it's generational, where the interns and the junior designers were just hiring and now the same age as the agency. Which is kind of a fun thing. So they're not going to know anything about our body of work in the first 10, 15 years of work, are they? It's always about what's next, I think, for me. You have a body of work that proves your place in the world, but really you're always kind of in the moment and think about what's next. And certainly clients are doing that because they have a lot of choice of agencies. So being front of mind and relevant to them, I think, is one thing, but also... So I think a lot of it is just about chemistry and collaboration and wanting to work together and enjoying that process and it being properly collaborative. It is a big part of what I see now.
Wise words, my friend.
Thank you.
Well, congratulations, with being able to keep a studio open design shop open for this long.
Thank you. Yeah.
We've seen a lot come and go, and I think that speaks to a lot of the integrity. And as I was saying, I feel like, again, just saying it from the outside, that there's a very strong culture. There's a vision. There's a philosophy that you don't see present at a lot of companies, but there seems to be, there's a clear captain or captains of the ship. And at least, for foreseeable future, as you said, you can't see too far into it. There's direction there. So, congratulations for everything that you guys have achieved. And I have one question that I like to ask everybody, and it changes a little bit depending who I'm speaking to, and the topic, but with a specific emphasis on the times that we're now in. What does it mean to you to be a creative leader?
Oof, wow. Well, thanks for your kind words before. That's really super nice of you to say that, because obviously from the inside you don't know that. I'm not a massive fan of leader. Because it feels like you're at the top. I was saying earlier, my feeling is you should create the creative space for other people to be successful, And I think leadership is about the person, not the entity. Of course, you need leadership. When things are difficult, you have to navigate the difficulties. You have to kind of give direction to the company and stuff. So I understand there is a literal kind of aspect to kind of running the company and being a leader.
Like a leadership role.
Yeah, leadership role. But I think for me, it's more leaders are a little bit too about the person and not enough about the people. So I like the fact that I have, with Apova, I've created something that we both care about deeply, and we're hopefully creating a space for other people to create. And in the background, I will steer the ship as well as I possibly can. But the ship is now, it's up to them to decide what to do with it as much as possible when it comes to the work and the way they want to make the work.
Love that. Well, Simon, thank you. It's been a pleasure. I loved our conversation before and could keep talking for another hour on these topics. It's so interesting, and to hear the way that you approach the work, running your business, again, successfully for such a long time.
Thank you.
And just to understand how you see the world. I really enjoy hearing your take on how you see things and how you see design in the future. So thank you so much for all of your time.
You're welcome. Thanks, Simon. It was good. I enjoyed it. It's like our other chat we had before. It's just good to talk about these things. It helps us all process where we are in the world. So thanks for taking the time to talk to me. I do appreciate it.
No, likewise. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Object, Subject, Form. If you enjoyed the conversation, please rate, subscribe, or leave a comment. It helps us keep the momentum going and reach more like-minded listeners like you. Don't forget to share this episode and follow me using the links in the description to stay connected and join the conversation.